pleasant environment, get ready for a healthy activity. Friendly atmosphere yields tremendous output. Poor surroundings, challenges of today's world. Melting glaciers, global warming is increasing.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. उम्मीद करता हूँ कि आप सब लोग खैरियत के साथ होंगे and I welcome you all here today to the 16th lecture of environmental psychology. Students, as usual, let us start our lecture with a brief review of what we discussed in our last lecture. हमारा last lecture जो था उसमें हम environmental aesthetics के बारे में बातचीत कर रहे थे. दरअसल हमारा current topic है environmental evaluation और इस topic के ज़ेरे असर हम ये जानने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि मुख्तलिफ environments में जब लोग उनको evaluate करते हैं तो किस तरह से किसी भी environment को positively या negatively evaluate किया जा सकता है. हमने पिछले चंद lectures में environmental evaluation को detail में discuss किया and we found out that there are various factors that could be present not only in the environment but also in the individuals that could constitute the positive or negative evaluation on the part of the people who are living or experiencing that particular environment. स्टूडेंट्स हमने इस तनाजुर में काफ़ी सारी थेरीज भी पढ़ी और हमने काफ़ी सारे मॉडल्स को भी डिस्कस किया एंड द लास्ट मॉडल दैट वी वर डिस्कसिंग इन आवर लास्ट लेक्चर वाज द एनवायरमेंटल एस्थेटिक्स. एनवायरमेंटल एस्थेटिक्स की डिस्कशन के स्टार्ट में मैंने आपको बताया कि सबसे पहले हमारे लिए ये जानना ज़रूरी है कि व्हाट डू वी एग्जैक्टली मीन बाय एस्थेटिक्स. एस्थेटिक्स इज़ एक्चुअली समवन्स पर्सनल बिलीफ अबाउट ब्यूटी. The way you look at things and you come to appreciate those things in the perspective of seeing them as more beautiful or as more ugly. Aesthetic sense of a person actually guides that person in beautifying his surroundings, his particular environment. Aesthetic sense plays a huge role in people's perceptions about environments. Now, different people can come up with different kinds of aesthetic values with differing natures in their aesthetic perceptions of the environment, and that's how there could be many individual differences when people come to appreciate different types of environments. Students, the question over here is that is beauty in the eyes of the beholder, or is it the environment that is the most important factor here? Of course, we discussed it in the preceding lectures that sometimes this is the eye of the beholder that finds a particular face prettier than another face, and sometimes this is the eyes of the people, the particular behavioral patterns or the particular cognitive patterns of the people that make them look at things from very, very different angles. Now, all the people cannot appreciate the same angles of a certain environment, but there would be some people who would find certain environments more beautiful than other environments. Now, when we talk about aesthetic dimensions of environment, and we're trying to understand that what environmental aesthetics is about, then we must not forget that we are actually studying psychology, and psychology is a subject that is science. Science means that we are using scientific methodology to understand different happenings around us. Now, the subject matter of environmental psychology is that what is environment's impact upon the behavior. We have been discussing it for quite a while, and we found out that the relationship between behavior and the environment is based upon reciprocity. Students, environmental aesthetics, when we try to study the aesthetics of environment in this particular fashion, which means that if we want to make scientific appreciation of the subject under study, then we need to use the scientific methodology also. And in this perspective, when we talk about environmental aesthetics, this means that we need to identify what are the objective dimensions of certain environment that could contribute to the perception of an environment in positive or negative fashion. This is what we discussed in this theory. Now, there may be individual differences about the judgment of the beauty. It is still possible to identify certain commonalities because, when we talk about it, when we try to dig out the truth, we find out that almost all of the times there are certain environments that are considered or assessed as beautiful by almost all of the people. And a very common example to that would be that most people would find Lahore Fort more beautiful than a junkyard. Is it right? Yeah. So this is where we come to find out that what are those stepping stones of some kind of scientific calculation about the environment that would help us understand that what are those particular dimensions in an environment that help a person appreciate it from the positive or from the negative angle. In this perspective, we discussed the researches conducted by Berlin way back in 1960. Berlin's idea was that when people experience different types of environments, every environment can be broken down into certain parts, which means every environment has certain features according to which this environment can be interpreted, this environment could be understood. And he called these characteristics of environments as collective properties of the environment. Berlin was extremely interested in learning that what are those contributing factors or what are those factors in which a particular environment could be decomposed or broken down. And he actually came down to identify 4 different factors that contribute to such kind of perception. Now, those 4 different factors in any environment could be: number 1, complexity of that environment; number 2, novelty of that environment; number 3, surprisingness present in that environment; and number 4, incongruity. Now, matter of fact, every environment can be seen from this perspective, that how much in complexity is available in this environment, how complex is this environment, या इस environment के अंदर surprisingness का element कितना ज़्यादा है, क्या वो बहुत ज़्यादा highlighted है या वो बहुत low है, or novelty, which means something new, something unique in that environment, something that a person might not have seen before. Novelty का aspect कितना ज़्यादा highlight किया गया है, plus incongruity, which means things don't falling into place together. Incongruity is clear differences, sometimes clear opposites. However, it does not mean that contrast is incongruity. Contrast is a certain kind of harmony, but incongruity means something like, I remember the example that I gave you last time. It was that a couple in which the husband's height is about 3 feet and the wife's height is about 6 feet. Now, this is some kind of incongruity because people are not used to watching couples with such physiological differences or such huge differences in their physical appearances. Usually, people tend to see couples as in which husbands are taller than their wives. So, in this kind of couple, there is glaring incongruity. Now, Berlin identified that these 4 factors are important in any particular environment when we try to appreciate it, or when we are trying to understand that what are the different objective dimensions in an environment. Based upon these factors, Berlin came up with certain arguments in 1974, and he said aesthetic judgments are most positive for environments at intermediate levels of each of these dimensions, which means that in any environment, these 4 factors can be understood, can be calculated. Any environment can be understood in the perspective of these 4 factors. However, when we are doing this scientifically, we need to have proper measurements for that. Now, to make the thing simple for you, I could always tell you that on each of these factors, we can have a 10-point scale, which means that if we are trying to appreciate complexity in an environment, then we could have a 10-point scale, and on point 1, the complexity is minimum, which means that this is very, very simple. And on point number 10, the complexity is at its max. It is the most complex environment. Berlin's argument was that any environment in these 4 dimensions, if it is these 4 factors are at intermediate levels, then we would come to see that this environment is good, or we would come to appreciate that environment positively. Now, he said that while intermediate levels are persistent and we come to appreciate intermediate levels, but just to find out that what are the times or what are the occasions when we would notice differences in the environment. And Berlin over here says that we either notice too much or too little of the presence of these factors. In any environment, if this is very, very simple, then you probably would notice it. And if this is very, very complex, then you would also probably notice that. So in that way, he said that we judge either too much or too little complexity, novelty, incongruity, surprisingness of an environment. Berlin model might have been reminding you of adaptation level. Adaptation level also speaks of the same things, in which different stimulus, if we are adapted to a certain environment, then we are not noticing that environment. However, we would come to notice that environment when the different stimuli in that environment start deviating from the normal level, and we call the normal level at the adaptation level. When things are present at adaptation level, you will not notice anything. However, when things start deviating from the norm, you will start noticing it. It is just like you are sitting in your room and you hear a loud bang. That is, a total deviation from the very neutral environment present in that room. So you would start noticing, you would say, what has gone wrong? Where this noise is coming from? Now, adaptation level is talking about the same things, just like Berlin is talking about the 4 different factors. Both of these theories are similar in the perspective that they both come up to propound that if things are at the intermediate level, then that environment is good. If things are deviating from that intermediate level, either towards the extreme side or towards the lowest side, then people would start noticing that. Now, based upon these observations, in 1976, Walwell came up with yet another set of observations. He thought that in any particular environment, judgments of beauty increase monotonically with increase in novelty and surprisingness. However, judgments of beauty decrease significantly if incongruity starts rising up. Walwell was of the idea कि किसी भी environment के अंदर जब surprisingness का elements और novelty के element increase होना शुरू होते हैं तो हम चीज़ों को खूबसूरत समझना शुरू कर देते हैं. हमारी चीज़ों के बारे में perception खूबसूरती की बुनियाद के ऊपर बनना शुरू हो जाती है. लेकिन जब environment के अंदर incongruity का element ज़्यादा highlight होना शुरू हो जाए तो ये हमारी perception के ऊपर negatively impact करती है, and probably we come to say that things are no more beautiful in this perspective. Students, when we talk about correlative properties, we can actually divide these 4 correlative properties into 2 groups with reference to exploration. Naturally, जब चीज़ें normal level से deviate करना शुरू करती हैं तो लोगों के अंदर explore करने की motivation पैदा होती है कि हमारे environment के अंदर क्या changes आना शुरू हो गई हैं. With reference to exploratory behavior, these 4 factors can be perceived with reference to 2 different types of explorations. And these 2 different types of explorations are, number 1, specific exploration, and number 2, diversive exploration. When we talk about specific exploration, this means that we are searching for certain specific factors in that environment. Specific exploration increases as the level of uncertainty in the environment increases. For example, अगर आप किसी पहाड़ी इलाके में हाइक पर गए हुए हैं और आप किसी बहुत ख़तरनाक रास्ते पर सफ़र कर रहे हैं और वो रास्ता आस्ता आस्ता बहुत स्टीप होता रहता है, बहुत नैरो होता रहता है और बहुत ज़्यादा हाइट पे है, तो इवेंचुअली एक टाइम ऐसा आएगा कि आप स्पेसिफिक एक्सप्लोरेशन के तहत उस रास्ते को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा बेहतर जानने की कोशिश करेंगे सो दैट यू वुड पुट योर स्टेप्स एग्जैक्टली वेयर you mean to put them, because you don't want to make any mistake over there that might cost you your life. According to this perspective, we get into specific exploration only when uncertainty in the environment increases. And the more uncertainty increases, the more specific exploration we would start getting into. Then is the diversive exploration. Pleasantness of a setting is the greatest at intermediate levels. That is what we understand. Diversive exploration occurs when uncertainty arousal levels are low. किसी भी environment में जब uncertainty intermediate level पे है या low है तो हमारा arousal level भी low होता है, और इस state of mind के तहत we get into diversive exploration. Students, when we talk about correlative properties of an environment and we find out that any environment is low on these correlative properties, we feel understimulated and we feel bored. I mean, if on all of the 4 factors that we have discussed, किसी environment पे ये चारों factor बहुत ज़्यादा कम है, तो हम naturally bore होना शुरू हो जाएंगे because there is not much available in that environment to engage us. However, अगर ये चारों के चारों एलिमेंट्स ज़्यादा होने शुरू हो जाएं तो हमारा अराउजल लेवल भी इंक्रीज़ होना शुरू हो जाएगा और हमारी मेंटल एक्सप्लेनेशन, हमारी परसेप्शन उस एनवायरनमेंट के बारे में आहिस्ता आहिस्ता चेंज होती जाएगी. स्टूडेंट्स, लेट अस नाउ टॉक अबाउट effective basis for environmental evaluation. When we use the word effective, that means something related to our sentiments, something related to our emotions, the feelings that we go through. Since our topic is environmental evaluation, this is very important for us to understand कि हम effective basis के ऊपर environment की evaluation किस तरह से करते हैं. Effective responses to environment are determined by degree of discrepancy between current levels of stimulation and the adaptation level. हमारा mood, हमारा sentiment किसी भी environment के अंदर change होना शुरू होता है जब environment के अंदर मुख्तलिफ चीज़ें, मुख्तलिफ stimuli adaptation level से deviate करना शुरू कर देती हैं. मसलन अगर आप अपने classroom में बैठे हैं और सब चीज़ें normal हैं, your teacher is doing a lecture, you are sitting in the class, you come to this class every other day, and the same kind of activity is taking place in the class that you are used to, you probably would not notice much of the things because you are used to that type of behavior. Let's suppose, for example, आपकी class में, while the teacher is doing the lecture, there are certain students who would be talking to each other, and teacher would off and on come back and ask them to be quiet. And to gather attention from the students, teacher would use different types of tactics. Everything is normal for you. Now, this is the environment that you have adapted to. All of the stimuli in that environment are according to your adaptation level. You would not find out anything different in this class than any other class you have taken before in this classroom. However, if the teacher just breaks down in anger, he becomes extremely furious and he starts yelling at the students at the top of his voice, then things are starting to deviate from the normal. Things are starting to deviate from the normal adaptation level in that environment. You would certainly start noticing that something is really, really different. And as the things are going different, as you hear the loud noise of the teacher, simultaneously you would feel a certain emotional feeling that is crossing your mind. Probably that feeling is fear. Probably that feeling is surprisingness. Probably you are shocked, but you are definitely going through the intense emotions. Now, this is exactly the point of effective basis for environmental evaluation. Environmental evaluation जब भी इंसान कर रहे होते हैं तो उसके अंदर ये चीज़ बहुत important होती है कि अफेक्ट के अंदर चेंजेस उस वक्त आना शुरू होती हैं जब चीज़ें नॉर्मल लेवल से डिविएट करना शुरू हो जाती हैं. Now, this is very simple and understandable. We discussed the Walwell's butterfly curve hypothesis, according to which we found out that there is a curvilinear relationship between positive effect and discrepancies resulting in either increase or decrease in arousal from adaptation level, which is pretty much the same thing. So the bottom line is that अगर एक साहब किसी एक बहुत छोटे से गांव से जिसमें शायद 100-150 लोग रहते हों शहर के अंदर आते हैं, एक छोटे शहर के अंदर आते हैं जिसकी आबादी तकरीबन 20,000 है, there are chances that this gentleman might be overwhelmed by 20,000 people. However, if a gentleman comes from Karachi to this small town where the total population is 20,000, he might start feeling bored in that environment because 20,000 people is very little amount of people compared to the population of Karachi. Students, let us now talk about yet another model which came up from Mehrabian and Russell. Mehrabian and Russell tried to understand environmental evaluation with reference to the information properties in a certain environment. We discussed before that in any environment there are so many stimuli that are bombarding on the minds of the people, and those stimuli can be taken with reference to the information that they might be bringing in, that those might be providing us. So, Mehrabian and Russell use the concept of information rate to define environmental stimulation level. Understanding environmental stimulation level is very much pertinent to our topic, which is environmental evaluation, because हम environmental evaluation के process में consciously उस वक्त घुसना शुरू होते हैं जब environment के अंदर चीज़ें deviate करना शुरू कर देती हैं. So in any environment, there are certain things that are stimulating us. While we were discussing effective basis of environmental evaluation, we discussed that with reference to different stimuli, when they start deviating from the normal level, there are certain affective changes that start taking place in the people. Now, stimulation is important, and in the affective theory, we discussed that different stimuli are impinging upon the senses of the people. However, in the current model, Mehrabian and Russell are taking environment in terms of the information that this environment contains for the people who would be into this environment. There are certain basic concepts that are very important with this model. Number one is information rate. Information rate is average rate of information impinging upon the senses of a person on per unit time. Arousal is a direct correlate of information rate. किसी environment में हम information rate को calculate कर सकते हैं, compute कर सकते हैं कि इस environment में कितनी information लोगों को मिल रही है. मिसाल के तौर पर अगर आप एक supermarket में हैं तो वहाँ पर आपको बहुत ज़्यादा information मिल रही है, because supermarket is all about information. However, if you are sitting in your bedroom, then the information level is low. Now, Mehrabian and Russell are talking about the same thing, that any environment can be taken or understood with reference to the information rate in a certain environment. जब किसी environment में information rate ज़्यादा होता है तो हमारा arousal level भी उस information rate के हिसाब से ज़्यादा हो जाता है. लेकिन जब किसी environment में information rate कम होता है तो हमारा arousal level भी उसी हिसाब से कम रहता है. बिल्कुल इस तरह से सुपरमार्केट के अंदर आप अपने आप को ज़रा ज़्यादा चाको चौबंद रखते हैं ताकि आप अपना रास्ता तलाश कर सकें, आप मुख्तलिफ शॉप्स को देख सकें, फिर आपको बहुत ज़्यादा इंफॉर्मेशन हासिल करनी होती है मुख्तलिफ प्रोडक्ट्स के बारे में जो आप ख़रीदना चाह रहे होते हैं. सो योर अराउजल लेवल इज़ प्रीटी मच हाई बिकॉज you are not only seeking more information, but there is a lot of information available to you in that supermarket. However, if you are sitting in your room, तो यहाँ पर आपको बहुत ज़्यादा information नहीं मिल रही, जिसकी वजह से आपका arousal level might probably be low. And this arousal level would be very, very low if you are simply relaxing in your room. Students, I hope you understood the concept of information rate and arousal level with reference to Mehrabian and Russell's model. Now, there are some important postulates that both of these psychologists did come up with. Number one is, curvilinear relationship between approach and arousal is moderated by the degree of pleasure a person experiences. Now, what is curvilinear relationship? Curvilinear relationship means that when things stay at the intermediate level, the arousal level rises up to a certain extent. However, when the things start deviating from the intermediate level, it means that the arousal level might rise up to a certain point, but after that there would be a sheer drop in the arousal level. Now, Mehrabian and Russell think that the curvilinear relationship between approach and arousal is moderated by the factor of pleasure. जिसका मतलब कुछ इस तरह से है कि when arousal level is high, you would probably try to approach a certain environment because that environment makes you feel more excited, that environment makes you feel more happy, which is why you want to get into that environment. However, if that environment is pleasing for you, then that is the most important factor. If the pleasure level is high, then the arousal level would also be high. Now, how much pleasure a person experiences in a certain environment is the most important factor. इसकी मिसाल कुछ इस तरह से है कि हम मुख्तलिफ environments को मुख्तलिफ properties के हिसाब से manipulate कर सकते हैं. मसलन हम एक classroom के environment को बहुत ज़्यादा attractive बना सकते हैं, बहुत ज़्यादा खूबसूरत बना सकते हैं. Let us suppose कि ये एक बच्चों की क्लास है और हम इसके अंदर मुख्तलिफ किस्म के कलर्स इस्तेमाल करते हैं जो बच्चों को पसंद हैं, like yellows, blues, reds, और हम क्लास के environment को भी totally change कर देते हैं. अब इस environment के हिसाब से classroom के अंदर information भी ज़्यादा है और उस information के हिसाब से arousal level भी increase होगा. लेकिन इस theory के हिसाब से if there is curvilinear relationship, तो arousal level increase होगा जिसकी वजह से बच्चे उस classroom के अंदर आना चाहेंगे और वहाँ पर वक्त गुजारना चाहेंगे. However, there is one more factor that might determine children's approach in that class. That is the factor of a teacher. Suppose the teacher is very what should I say, horrible. And kids are so afraid of this teacher, which means that their experience of staying in the class is not at all pleasing. Now, based upon this pleasure factor, students' approach or avoidance behavior would start differing. If the teacher is also good, then students might be having very pleasing experience in that classroom, and their approach pattern towards that class would be magnified. However, if the teacher is not up to that mark and students feel horrified or students are afraid of the teacher, then that experience is not pleasing, though the environment is extremely arousing. So you see, students, that pleasure is the factor that moderates the approach behavior with reference to arousal. The relationship holds only when pleasure remains at intermediate level. When there is intermediate level of pleasure, this relationship is exactly intact like the way we have talked about it. However, if the pleasure starts increasing more and more and more, and the level of pleasure actually has increased manifold, then that behavior would be strengthened. However, if the pleasure starts dropping down in that environment and drops down with on huge degrees, then naturally there would be more avoidance behavior. So people going on one place, if they find it pleasing and this place becomes more and more exciting every other day, people would want to go there over and over again. Just like, if you are following a tournament of cricket, then every other day your interest in different matches would be increased if you are really interested into those matches. If you are following the competition, if you are taking sides with different teams, then every other match would unfold a different side of the story, which means that your pleasure would gradually start increasing and your behavior to watch those cricket matches on television would be strengthened more and more. However, one day you find out that a lot of gambling is taking place between these cricket matches and the teams are not really competing with each other. You actually start losing your trust upon the teams. You actually start losing your interest into it. And the pleasure certainly starts dropping down. The more the pleasure drops down, the more you start losing interest in that environment. And eventually there might come a time when you would say, I don't want to watch these cricket matches. They are simply boring because everything has been pre-decided. So this is something like it. Based upon these findings, Russell and Pratt in 1980 came up with yet another model. Students, हमने जो पिछला मॉडल डिस्कस किया उसके अंदर हमने एक बात आइडेंटिफाई की कि ज़रूरी नहीं कि जब किसी एनवायरनमेंट में ऐसे एलिमेंट्स हों, वो इंफॉर्मेशन हो या डिफरेंट स्टिमुलाई का मैग्नीट्यूड हो जो इंसानों को अराउज करता हो, ज़रूरी नहीं कि अराउजल के इंक्रीज़ होने के साथ अप्रोच बिहेवियर भी इंक्रीज़ होना शुरू हो जाए. अराउजल किसी एनवायरनमेंट के अंदर बहुत ज़्यादा हाई भी हो सकती है, लेकिन उसके साथ ही साथ वो एनवायरनमेंट इतना मज़े का नहीं हो सकता. People might not start liking that environment. So it means that arousal, though, is a very, very important factor, but in any environment, arousal is not the only factor that would determine people's approach or avoidance behavior in that environment. And this is what Russell and Pratt tried to understand in their subsequent researches. And after their researches, they came up with this model. According to this model, as you can see on the slide, there are different terminologies written in a circle. According to this model, you can interpret any environment with reference to 4 basic dimensions. Any environment can be arousing, that you are seeing at the top of the circle. On one side, it could be extremely arousing. On the other side, this environment could be extremely boring, totally sleepy. And there is a horizontal line that's crossing the circle that also represents 2 dimensions, which means an environment could be unpleasant and an environment could be pleasant. So every environment can be seen with reference to its arousal level, which means that the arousal level is very high, and if it is very high, this is very arousing environment, and if this is very low, this is sleepy environment. So we can also see that environment is pleasant or unpleasant. However, there are different shades also. Now, how do we understand these shades of distressing, exciting, relaxing, and gloomy? Environment high in arousal can be perceived as pleasant. Exciting settings such as a cricket match. However, environment low in arousal can also be perceived as pleasant. As you can see in the circle, this environment could be relaxing. Similarly, an environment that's very, very arousing can also be distressing because it is tilting towards unpleasantness. And if the arousal level is low, then this environment is gloomy. So I hope you could understand by this model that there are different types of emotional reactions that we go through in a certain environment. मसलन अगर आप बहुत ज़्यादा गुस्से में हैं तो इसका मतलब है कि आपका अराउजल लेवल बहुत ज़्यादा हाई है, लेकिन गुस्से में होना एक प्लेजेंट फीलिंग नहीं होती. So it means that your arousal level is very high, you are totally excited, but the total experience is very, very unpleasant, and you would not want to get angry every now and then. Now the important thing is, what is making you angry? You would definitely not want to approach that thing, that environment, or that object in the environment over and over again in order to avoid the anger. So students, I hope you would have understood out of our discussion of this model that our reactions in environment are our emotional reactions in an environment are not totally determined by arousal. Arousal level being high or low can be combined with pleasantness or unpleasantness in order to get different shades of emotional reactions in a certain environment. Students, this was all we had to discuss about environmental evaluation. I hope you would have understood the basic things, that when we try to evaluate a certain environment, we try different things. Those things could be present in the environment, those things could be present in the individuals. However, in environmental psychology, when we try to understand environmental evaluation, we have to do it very, very scientifically, which means we have to find out कि किसी भी एक environment में certain objects इंसानों को 2 किलोग्राम की खुशी देते हैं या 500 किलोमीटर की खुशी देते हैं. I mean, we have to determine and measure everything with reference to certain scientific units. And these theories and different models that we have discussed have attempted to decompose environment or break down an environment into its constituting parts in order to find out certain units where these different factors or different contributing units could be measured, and then identifying a relationship like how much a certain factor in an environment can be manipulated with to get a certain emotional reaction in the people who are present in that particular environment. Now, at this point, we would have to take our lecture forward, and our next topic is environmental attitudes. This is a very, very interesting topic, that how do we build up our attitudes? How do we come to build up our environmental attitudes? Environment के बारे में हमारे attitudes किस तरह से बनते हैं? And there is a very simple catch statement for that says, relationship amongst the processes of environmental perception, cognition, and evaluation. We have studied all three things in the initial discussions or the previous lectures related to the studies of this chapter of ours. Now we would use all of these concepts in order to find out that how people build up environmental attitudes. And when we will do that, we'll definitely try to find out that what are the relationships between the processes of environmental perception, cognition, and evaluation, because that is how we will come to understand attitudes. Now, what is attitude? How do we come to understand attitude? I hope you would have remembered an exercise from one of our previous lectures in which I gave you a small word association test, जिसके अंदर मैं एक लफ्ज़ बोलता हूँ और आप उस लफ्ज़ के बारे में जुमला बनाते हैं. मसलन, if I speak a word father, and the word that comes to your mind is that my father is a great man, that is your attitude towards your father. Attitude, not defining it technically, but in general terms, we could always say that attitude is the way we feel about certain things, and our feeling about those certain things would determine how are we going to behave towards those things. मिसाल के तौर पर अगर हमें बच्चे अच्छे लगते हैं तो ये हमारा एटीट्यूड हो सकता है, और इसके ज़रिए असर हमारा बिहेवियर पैटर्न ये हो सकता है कि हम बच्चों के साथ काइंड रहें, हम बच्चों के साथ केयरिंग रहें और अंडरस्टैंडिंग रहें, ना कि बच्चों के साथ वायलेंस इस्तेमाल करें या उनको डांटें. सो दिस इज़ the way attitudes relate to the subsequent behavioral patterns of the people. Now, when we talk about attitude, attitude involves the way we think about, feel about, and behave towards an object, which means that an attitude consists of a cognitive component, affective component, and behavioral component. जब हम मुख्तलिफ़ चीज़ों को देखते हैं, हम उनके बारे में फ़ील करते हैं, हम उनके बारे में महसूस करते हैं, हमारे जहन में मुख्तलिफ़ आइडियाज़ आते हैं उन चीज़ों के बारे में, और उन आइडियाज़ की बुनियाद के ऊपर हम एक्शन में आते हैं और बिहेव करते हैं. Now when we translate this simple definition into technical terminologies, then we can always say that in the attitude there is always an affective dimension, which means a sentimental, emotional feeling with reference to the object of attitude. There is a cognitive dimension to it, which means that information processing with reference to that particular object. How do we come to perceive that object? That becomes very important. And finally, the action part, which means how are we going to behave towards that object of attitude. Students, let us at this point talk about the cognitive component of the attitude. It consists of processes by which we perceive our environment and how the perceptual processes are involved in developing our cognition and understanding of the environment. These are the processes by which cognitive component of the attitude is formed. हमने अपने पिछले lectures में discuss किया, perception is a very interesting but very complicated process also. इंसान जब मुख्तलिफ़ चीज़ों को perceive कर रहे होते हैं तो उसके लिए हमारे अंदर जो मुख्तलिफ़ gadgets लगे हुए हैं, those gadgets are actually our 5 senses. We use our 5 senses to learn about the world. If I am in a certain environment, I can see that environment through my eyes. I can feel that environment through the smell and through touching different things, different objects that are present in that environment. I can hear different sounds and voices. And all of this information, when it gets into my brain, I process that information. Now that processing actually builds up my cognition about that certain environment or certain objects present in that environment. The important point over here is to understand and remember that all the information that is coming to our mind through the use of our senses is not always correct, because the capability of our senses is kind of limited. It is not 100%. So whatever exists out there in the environment, in the real world, we get a lot of information about it, but all of that information is not correct. And when we process that information in our mind, that is the process of building up our cognitions about the world outside, about the environment in which we live, about different objects that are present in that environment. So these are the processes by which cognitive component of attitude is formed, which means that when we learn about different things in the environment and that information is processed in our mind, that constitutes the cognitive component of our attitude. Attitude is the way we think, feel, and behave towards certain things. Now let us come down to the affective component. Affective component means that how do we feel about things? हम चीज़ों को देखकर उनके साथ किस तासुर के साथ एसोसिएट करते हैं? क्या हमारा प्रेजेंट तासुर है या अनप्लेजेंट तासुर है? स्टूडेंट्स, हमने अपने जो पिछला टॉपिक पढ़ा, एनवायरमेंटल इवैल्यूएशन, दैट वाज अ डीप एक्सप्लोरेशन इनटू अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि एनवायरनमेंट के अंदर वो कौन से फैक्टर्स होते हैं जिसकी वजह से हम एनवायरनमेंट की पॉजिटिव या नेगेटिव एवैल्यूएशन बनाना शुरू कर देते हैं. दरअसल all of these processes are very relevant to understand the affective component of attitude building. Finally, the behavioral component. The third and the most important part of an attitude is that when we have understood a certain object, we have associated with that object in an environment either positively or negatively, how are we going to behave towards that object? Now, this is where the behavioral component of the attitude comes over. Now, particular characteristics of cognitions that have implications for one's overall attitude towards environment are very, very important. Our cognitions have certain characteristics that help us build the idea about objects present in the environment or the environment in which we are surviving. Now, students, these things we have discussed. We have understood that how we perceive information from environment, how we build up our cognition from our previous theories. We also understood that how we evaluate environment positively or negatively. Now, from this point onwards, we would try to study कि किसी भी information के अंदर या हम किसी भी object के बारे में जब अपनी cognition बनाते हैं तो उसके अंदर क्या characteristics होती हैं जो हमारे effect को मुतासिर करती हैं या हमारे sentiments को मुतासिर करती हैं और उन sentiments की basis के ऊपर हम उस object के साथ किस तरह से associate करते हैं. And finally, we build up our attitude and how our attitudes are consistent with our behavioral patterns. Now, when we have a certain way of thinking towards a certain object, that is a feeling in my mind, that is an idea in my mind. Now, I have to behave with that particular object according to the idea that exists in my mind. Just like I gave you the example, if we love the kids, then we would be kind towards the kids. Now, in this part of the discussion, this becomes very, very important for us to identify that either our behavior is consistent with our attitudes or there is some discrepancy. Sometimes it happens that there is a discrepancy between our attitude and our behavior. मिसाल के तौर पर हम ये सोच सकते हैं कि all of the smokers out there might be convinced that smoking is a very bad habit. Yes, they have that attitude in their mind that smoking is bad, is dangerous for their health, and yet they find smoking very, very pleasing. So there is a discrepancy between the way they feel towards cigarette smoking and the way they behave towards cigarette smoking. Now, that is a lot of inconsistency between the way people build up their attitude, the attitude component and the behavioral component. These are some of the things that we will be discussing from this point onwards. We will discuss theories regarding the processes by which these components can be properly studied. Students, let us get into the environmental attitude formation. Environmental attitude formation किस तरह से होती है? दरअसल environmental attitude can be taken as a specialized case of attitude formation, which means that we are going to discuss all of those processes that help people or individuals build up attitudes, but we would add the word environment with it and we would take environmental attitude formation as a special case, which means we'll try to understand environmental attitude formation through different processes that go to explain the attitude formation in general. Students, जब हम attitude formation की बात करते हैं और हम इस बात को explain करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि attitudes किस तरह से बनते हैं, तो यहाँ पर learning हमारे लिए बहुत ज़्यादा important होती है कि हम किस तरह चीज़ों को learn करते हैं. क्योंकि जैसे जैसे हम चीज़ों को learn करते हैं, उस information को हम अपने जहन में लेके जाते हैं और उस information को process करते हैं, उसके साथ different sentimental meanings attach करते हैं, and finally we attach the behavioral component. Now that is how we are actually building up our attitude. इसकी एक simple example and very easy to understand is the behavior of the children. जब बच्चे पैदा होते हैं, छोटे बच्चे, they gradually go through the process of growth, and after 1 or 2 years, parents start finding out that these kids are copying the behavior of their fathers or their mothers, or they are copying the behavior of their brothers and sisters. Now, these kids are so young, these infants are so young. 2 years old baby is very young. They hardly speak, they hardly walk. We hardly can call them intelligent enough to understand the world around themselves. And yet, they are performing a very, very intelligent function, which is that they are copying the behavior of their brothers and sisters, their family members, their fathers or mothers. How do they come to do that? Definitely, there is something inside these infants that's making them learn different types of attitudes that are prevalent in their environments. How do they learn those attitudes? How do they learn those things? How do they learn to behave in certain characteristic patterns is all the subject matter of learning. Now, learning is one of the main topics of psychology. And every time we try to understand learning in psychology, we cannot forget about the theories of classical conditioning and instrumental conditioning that explain the processes of learning. Simultaneously, the process of observational learning is very, very important for us if we want to understand that how people learn things. Now, I told you a little while back that we are taking attitude formation, environmental attitude formation, as a special case of attitude formation, which means that we would use these principles, we would use these theories in order to understand the environmental attitude formation. Students, when we talk about attitudes के अंदर beliefs बहुत ज़्यादा important किरदार अदा करते हैं. Belief is someone's understanding about a certain thing, object, or person, to a certain feeling about people, objects, or things in their environment. Now, when we talk about attitudes and we talk about the cognitive foundations of attitudes, we find out that there are two very, very important components in there, and those are beliefs and values, as well as affective basis for attitudes. So beliefs and values and affect. Belief is the way people feel towards things. Values are the characteristic patterns of behaving towards certain things. And affect means that if you behave like if you tell a little kid, behave like a grown-up boy, he feels very proud of it if he has behaved like a grown-up boy, which means that he's attaching the sentiment of grandiosity or the sentiment of satisfaction or a grown-up person by behaving in that particular fashion. What are beliefs? When we say the word belief, there are many things that could come to your mind. Belief is your fixed way of thinking towards a certain thing. Misal ke taur par, one could say, stay away from the strangers. Strangers are dangerous. Now that is a belief. Another person might say, I like to meet with people because I would like to become friends with them. And people bring a lot of good to me. That is also belief. We are hearing a certain person's belief. When we think about belief with reference to attitude formation and inside the basic anatomy of the attitude, we come to find out that beliefs are the basic cognitive blocks of an attitude. किसी भी attitude के जो building blocks हैं, जो cognitive building blocks हैं, those are the beliefs. And every person at one point of time has so many different types of beliefs. Matter of fact, when we're born on this earth, we probably start learning, the first thing that we start learning is beliefs from our parents or from our immediate environments, our immediate surroundings. When we talk about beliefs, beliefs can be taken in terms of two different ways. One type of beliefs can be called primitive belief, and another type of belief can be called the higher order belief. Now let us try to see that what are these two types of beliefs. When we talk about primitive beliefs are non-conscious. I mean, these are the ideas existing in our mind we hardly ever question. Like any kid can say that I love mommy. And any kid would be believing that whatever mommy tells me is right, because mommy always tells me the truth. Now whatever mommy is telling to this kid is taking that information as truth. Now that is the kid's belief towards his mother. His belief is that mothers always tell the truth, mothers are always right, and mothers never lie to the people. So every time this kid has to learn something about the world, he has to learn something about a certain object in his environment, the information that is coming from the mother is the most important information. After that, when the kids start going to the school, they have started building another belief, which is their belief in the teachers. Now the kids would say that whatever mommy is telling me is really, really true. And whatever the teacher is telling me is actually the technical information about the world. And this is wonderful and this is amazing. So you might have heard kids talking to their mothers when they come back from school. Mommy, my teacher told me that the world is round. Is that really? That is great. And when mommy sometimes say, I think the world is not round, the world might be square. No, my teacher said that the world is round. When kids are getting into this kind of debate with their mothers, that means that they are communicating a belief that whatever technical information is coming down their way from their teachers is also based upon truth. Now, beliefs may be based upon direct experiences. For example, belief in the validity of our sense impressions. How many times do we question our senses? We always say that whatever I have seen is right, whatever I have seen is correct. Matter of fact, if you have been watching courtroom cases, movies, then you would come across many different types of scenes in which different witnesses in the witness boxes are being questioned by the lawyers, and they are being coaxed into a kind of discussion where the witnesses eventually come to understand that whatever they actually saw was a total lie, whatever they actually saw was an illusion. किसी भी चीज़ की सच्चाई को जानने के लिए, किसी भी चीज़ की सच्चाई के लिए सबसे बेहतर सबूत जो हमारे पास होता है वो ये है कि मैंने अपनी आंखों से देखा, मैंने अपने कानों से सुना। और यहाँ पर दरअसल हम ये बिलीफ कम्युनिकेट कर रहे होते हैं कि हमारी सेंसेस परफेक्टली काम करती हैं और हमारी सेंसेस हमें कभी भी रॉन्ग इन्फॉर्मेशन नहीं देती। हो सकता है कि हमने अपनी आंखों से जो चीज़ देखी हो वो रॉन्ग इन्फॉर्मेशन की बेस पर हो सकता है जो चीज़ हमने सुनी हो वो उस तरह से ना हो। Because I told you at the start of the lecture that whatever information is coming to our way through our sense organs is not always 100% correct. So coming down to primitive beliefs are non-conscious. This is our consistent way of thinking. हम इस किस्म के beliefs को कभी भी question नहीं करते और इस किस्म के beliefs अमूमन आप बच्चों में बहुत आसानी से ढूंढ सकते हैं जब बच्चे अपने पेरेंट्स के बारे में बताते हैं या अपने टीचर्स के बारे में बताते हैं या दुनिया की मुख्तलिफ चीज़ों के बारे में बताते हैं. These are the things that are fixed in their minds. However, there are other types of beliefs which can be called higher order beliefs. Let us see what higher order beliefs mean. Higher order beliefs include the assertion of a conscious premise in the thought process of arriving at a belief. For example, the belief that air pollution is bad for health. Higher order belief may be based upon several other beliefs. जब हम higher order beliefs की बात करते हैं, this is where we come to understand the world. I mean, the children start growing up and they start using their own senses, their own information, and their own mental processing of that information to build up their further beliefs and further ideas. Now, let us imagine that if you are against air pollution, then you would be against all those things that are creating air pollution. Then probably you would also be in the favor that all those laws that prohibit people from spreading air pollution are actually very good laws, and you would always be in the favor of those laws. However, your belief about air pollution is built up upon many different types of beliefs. It is your belief in the source that is providing you with this type of information. And that source might be a government agency, that source might be media, that source simply might be teachers in the schools, colleges, or universities. So when you are building up the belief that air pollution is bad, you are actually showing your belief in many different things. And this belief is based upon your other beliefs. Students, at this point of time, we are almost done with our day today. हमारा वक्त ख़त्म हुआ चाहता है. हम अपने अगले लेक्चर के अंदर बिलीव्स के बारे में और ख़ास तौर पे हायर ऑर्डर बिलीव्स के बारे में ज़्यादा डिटेल के अंदर डिस्कशन करेंगे. इस वक्त मुझे इजाज़त दीजिए. अपना ख्याल रखिएगा, अपने गिरदोनवा के लोगों का ख्याल रखिएगा. अल्लाह हाफ़िज़.